Okay. Um, I am live. And it's my first time actually trying to play around with this StreamYard thing, so bear with me. Um, I would like to present somewhat of some substance to where I'm going with a lot of this tonight. So bear with me if I screw up on any technical difficulties or whatnot. Here we go.
Totally different culture than we have, who cannot even relate to the things that we relate to. That is the problem. And as Black women, we have to be the inspiration for the nation, for our men. We have to start out into the community educating the children, educating ourselves. Because once we educate ourselves, the children will become educated, because we are the ones that teach the children. We are the ones that decorate the homes. We are the ones that are with both female and male children.
Come on now.
We are the ones that the children look to as the image in terms of their daily education. So it is important that we don't get our values mixed up and feel that we have to educate the world. We haven't first educated ourselves. It's still always a self thing.
Indeed.
I mean, the world will relate to us once we can relate to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we are afraid of definitions and afraid to set guidelines because we might have to live by them. If you stand up and say a Black woman should do this and that, then you might have to do that. But if you say, well, we don't have to say anything, we can just do it. Do what? So like everybody can do their own thing. But every society needs a value system. Every society has a criteria in which they live by.
And we live by everybody else's.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. That's somewhat of a finer point of where I want to start this whole thing. The miseducation of the Negro, whom have now evolved into what we consider now Black. We now live in a state where there are several different generations, literal identical or unique and distinct generations of adults that are now facing this challenge of commanding a certain evolution that the world deserves at this present moment. And I think some of the difficulty that we run into more than anything else is that we as people of color in America are so diverse and yet still suffering from the same syndrome that all Americans, from your regular average to whatever, are suffering from, and that's a severe case of miseducation to the point where we are unable to actually agree, converse, or actually be more assistant as well as accountable to each other as Americans first. Then we're comfortable with now facing this challenge of a severe coming to Jesus moment of catching up to a reality that we have to look at from outside of our own universe. We've come a long way. In less than 50 years, we've gone from Negro to Afro-American to Black, to such a thing that now Black has become one of the most conflictive concepts in itself, due to the mere fact that all people of color all around the world want a piece of black too. And I wouldn't blame them, although what made us who we are as black people or people of color in this country 2020, respectfully, is a very slippery slope, a very unique and awkward kind of dynamic, because with great power comes great responsibility. But the emancipation of all people has been a slow process, not due to its ability to allow everyone to be treated equally, but due to the mere fact that we are still incapable of enlightening each other as to the fact that we all are here because of all of us. And up until this point in our society, in our history of society, we've grown to a point where, there aren't people who are still capable of cashing it in on, don't mind them none, they're just to help kind of thing. It's a no-brainer that we were, brought to this country or been a part of this country. And a lot of what was productive, during the slave era, we were the highest producing country in the world. We were great again. And yet, in the process of that, there was a double coin sided of sorts, because the world was unaware of how the conditions of chattel slavery were inhumane. And yet, and still in the process of that, we as a captive people still invented things like Eli Whitney and the cotton gin and, and all these other, Benjamin Banneker, we've got so many stories. Frederick Douglass, we've got so many stories of why America had become great in the first place. And yet people of color have suffered the most in their inability to enlighten others as to why there should be no conflict between why Black lives still matter and why all lives matter too. There should be no conflict as to why Black men and women are in the lowest state of emotional stability to handle being what we once were just 50 years ago as the highest and the biggest population of people in this country and the most stable community, into which now we can't even start to phantom, the majority of our adult people of color can't even recall, due to our miseducation of Americans as a whole, let alone, people of color, the reality that existed at a time and a frame where this country was being great. We are in this new state where we've achieved so much freedom. We're now LBGT, we're now feminists, we're now Democrats and Republicans, and free to be who we want to be, and all these other things to such a degree that, due to the mere fact that it's just bits and pieces of little pieces of bits of people, it's caused us to really have this conflict with the ability to figure out, so why is this still an issue? It's still an issue because for every person of color who stands up all around the country and demands treatment for something, it's also individual due to its regional cultural structure. The struggle of a Washingtonian is different than the struggle of a New York person, is is different than a person in Watts or a person in Houston or a person in Ohio or, a person in Puerto Rico. Oh, it's all so vast and unique that we can't literally state who we are as a people, because the people have a conundrum. So here we are, and in the process of where we are as a people of color, the problem that we have is that we want to speak for all the people. We want us to be included. For all the non-people of color watching this video, let me hip you to something. The majority of all people of color in this country right now really honestly want to be just as laid back and empowered as everyone else who seems to have a discomfort in the mere fact that part of their conflict with all of this hoopla over, protest and God damn it, this civil rights thing again, is due to the mere fact that their apathy, their privilege, allows them to not necessarily feel the need to consider, wow, some of what Martin Luther King talked about is true. There are some people of color who are still suffering from a condition of not seeing any form of equality due to the mere fact that they should not be required to clean up, wear a suit, be a respectful person to your community, and don't be too loud, and don't talk to white folks like that, and and don't act like you're special, because that's how America has grown to where it's become. But it's no longer that kind of place. We don't live in a normal Rockwell thing. And as bad as it seems for a lot of things, we as people of color have our own struggle. We're still not comfortable with understanding our history and where it came from. When we want to be pro-black and down and proud and this, that, and the other, we are uncomfortable with the personal things that we need to right now be more accountable for right now with each other right now. In 1962, Malcolm X made a speech and said that the black woman has become the most unappreciated, unrespected, disrespected, blah, blah, blah in the country. And that was true to a theory. In the process of all of that, we've gone from 1962 to 1972, and the feminist movement offered a few examples enough that their use of us as people of color became more beneficial to a lot of people non of color. The feminist movement did not benefit black women Negro women, women of color, as much as it did white folks, because, well, truth be told, uh, truth be told, it's still not valued. And yet many of the generations of people of color of the female persuasion are seriously honest when they ask these questions as to where is my mate, where is my man, where is my king, where is this, that, and the other. And yet the miseducation, the manipulation of us as a culture has caused a real genetic ignorance that we need to really check ourselves if we want to get somewhere, because we're not going to get somewhere until we can explain to others how hard and difficult our problem is already in our communities, trying to, emancipate each other. As in the statement, as where I started, the most difficult thing for us at this point as people of color is checking our own selves, not just our own selves, but more importantly, our own female, male people. Now that we're living in a society where there's more educated females of color in this country than ever even allowed, prior to the allowance of more females, period, to be educated and emancipated. The last people thought to be in that food chain was going to be Black women. And yet we raised these people. We birthed these people. We fed them out of our own nipples. We sacrificed our own culture and our own family dynamic at a time when the only way for a single Black mother to take care of her children was to take care of someone else's children, to such a degree that we have an instinctual discomfort with this memory and acceptance, or even identity of being a servant, being a house person. And yet and still, that feminist thing really did a number on us, because we were not aware of how deep the fix was in. And this is 2020, and we're still trying to express how Black Lives Matter, when every now and occurrence we need to bring up the fact that Black men are dying at a very unnatural rate in this country. And yet what empowers and keeps this whole struggle alive is when we have the injustices to Black women. That keeps it right there, because thank God we've got them, or we'd have no Black Lives Matter. But yet and still, now that we're in this state where we have the ability to escape into all these other little micro, realities, we are unaware how conflictive it becomes when we have to live in a society where we want to fight for each and every one of us. And yet it's hard when too many of each and every one of us don't care about each and every one of us. We want to say Black Lives Matter, but we can't argue against the reality that so many of us are dying by our own hands. And yet and still we're not serious enough about wanting to come to Jesus with the reality that, sometimes the only way for us to get to where we're going to go is if we get ourselves together enough to be prepared to show others how it might not be easy, but it's needed for us to emancipate our emotional selves from a lot of miseducated historical facts we believe to exist. There is no folklore. There are more black men in college than there is in prison. There is not someone capable of suited for whomever. The problem is that we want it where we're at. And we have to understand that it's like the concept of Juneteenth. Another reason why I kind of dislike Texas. 2.5 years it took for DC to put together an army and march all the way down to Texas to demand that they let their people go. And yet and still they were still finding people who hadn't gotten the memo in the 70s and 80s as to slavery is no longer. The problem is that they freed everybody before they educated everybody into the reason why they were more important as whom they were at their greatest than what anyone could possibly say. People want to talk about how people hate people of color so much. The reason why many of these people hate people of color so much is because people of color have a honest argument towards the mere fact that, while reparations would be a beautiful thing to do, we would not need reparations if we were capable of being allowed to be empowered enough to actually take this country to where it's been. We only allow that in bits and pieces when we accidentally find some way of changing the culture of the world by way of our ability to express ourselves. We now have more people of non-color who are equipped with rhythm and big booties and TikTok and this and that. There are people all around the world that glorify the most embarrassing images of whom people of color in this country have evolved to. And so we suffer this kind of discomfort in our own communities and our own culture by way of believing that somehow, some way, somehow, everyone loves people of color, but nobody loves people of color who don't feel like they're being loved. And so the reason why this country is at such a stuck right now is because you can't allow this new generation. Oh my God. We have let down the last generations of new adults coming due to the mere fact that none of us was prepared to deal with this crack thing. We were not prepared to deal with this turn of the century. We were not prepared to deal with 2000 party over. Oops, out of time. We no longer are capable of being able to remember how to party like it was 1999, because in 2020, it seems as if there is no let up. And yet we can't get up and get out and do something because we're still struggling with what Dr. Joyce DeGruy called post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's the same technology that the Jews have allowed themselves to express a reason for them to be identified as genetic sufferers of the Holocaust. And yet humans on this planet have been holocausting each other all the way up into where we're at right now. For the first time in the history of humanity, we're capable of being connected by a one-to-one basis with each other, and yet somehow or another we're still suffering from people who still want to go back to being the princess and the pea. As a black man of color in this country, the one wish that I would have more than anything else is that I was capable of assisting other people in empowering and educating and emancipating other people spiritually. It's grown to a point where in some cases, the problem that we have is just the mere fact that people have grown to a part, to a moment, to a time where they really honestly believe that I'm stuck. I mean, when I say stuck, here's what I mean by stuck. Man, I need to work on this sound. So here we are in this state of the hate, of the need to self-medicate in order for us to be able to relate or just get away with, just get past today. As we know that there are so many people with so many issues and problems that even if we would believe that all we need to do is get up and stand up for our rights, we have such a varied image and skew of what we believe should be our personal permissions that we are incapable of coming to Jesus with the reality that part of the reason why we differ with others of other cultures or colors and whatnot, Democrats, Republicans, blah, 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 is just due to the mere fact that we feel and believe that if, in fact, we were to allow everyone else to have the same equal permissions that we have, evolved into for so many people who, while they want to get up and talk about how patriotic their lineage is here on this Americanized dirt, it wouldn't hurt if they were more capable of understanding that there wasn't that many wealthy people of color or non-people of color that own these things, and we were all indentured, and it still took all of us. And while they, oh yeah, I had a little Irish, I had a little Polish, a little this, that, and the other, it didn't really matter. What mattered is up until this point, the only thing that really allowed a lot of the people that today are having more discomfort enough to be caught as Karens on the wrong day is just due to the mere fact that they all were structured into believing that they were at least, if nothing else, better than people of color, while people of color were still more important enough that we are still noted in the same manner that now undocumented workers are seen as another race. And yet and still we're in the same place as we were when we started this country, into which we now try to enforce some of the same beliefs that we as people, no matter which race you claim to be from, escaped from the old world to get to the new world, to build this new order of the ages that we still can't let go and let God, because we can't believe that any higher being would be within its rights as respectable for putting us in a state that we are. And yet there are more people around this earth that are willing to give up more to be where we are in our shoes in our own suffering than we're capable of stop and sitting back and going, you know, it might really suck to be me right now, but it could be worse. I could be in Botswana. I could be in Ireland or England or Japan or Russia or somewhere else with the same options. And yet and still we've got this black thing. See, we've been a lot of things. We've been Africans, we've been Negroes, we've been the ER version, we've been a lot of different things, because people of color have not been just solely valued for their slave qualities. There were people of color, of culture, of prestige or whatnot, of all colors and whatnot. You know, the whole Masonic order outside of this country was built upon the respect for each other and that classism that now we're still starting to struggle as a whole society, due to the mere fact that there should be no more rules, that just because your blood is a little more bluer than mine's, I should not be respected into this. You don't have to have a bloodline. You don't have to come from this, that, and the other. You just have to have the heart and the talent and the perspective enough to support a purpose that the whole world can benefit from. We've grown so spoiled in our existence here in America that we are unaware of how we look so personally selfish in our ability to feel as if we are what's the word? We are entitled to be allowed to be selfishly contained in our own desire to do something, because we're still living in this, I'm a free doggone American. And yet from the first drop of blood that made America, due to our miseducation as a whole, we can't even agree on the mere fact that the first drop of blood that was fought for this dirt, fought for this country, fought for where we are, even in 2020, what came from a person of color. And so it's not that Black lives should matter more than anything else, but it's the fact that if it wasn't for Black lives mattering more, there would be less people of non-color allowed to get some of the benefits into which they exist in now. See, the worst thing about most racist people is that they're just not mad at us. They're mad at how their own people have kept and treated them to such a degree that they are envious of the mere fact that, ain't y'all got enough? What about us? And to be honest with you, a lot more of us as Americans would be a lot more empathetic if we were capable of viewing and seeing how Indians and on reservations are dirty white trash, or hillbillies or rednecks, or, you know, just insignificant, unidentified people of non-color exist in some of the more under the developed areas in this world or in this country as well. Yeah. And yet, due to our multimedias and whatnot, we have this feeling that, oh yeah, but we come a long way and this and the other and blah 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 blah. And is that all you want? I mean, as Americans, if we are not ready to be willing to be sick and tired of being secondhand humans on an earth that exists through our own heads rent free. And today is closer to the day that more of us could just change humanity as it exists in its history forever. If we just consider the mere fact that if not you, then who? If not now, then when? And if you knew what more people know, then maybe even the hard limits you believe existed within you will become soft limits, enough for you to consider, maybe my bloodline would be better off with a little different culture, different color, different race mixed into it, because that's how you got this far in the first place. The majority of Americans cannot identify themselves as a thoroughbred from anywhere else. We're all mixtures of something else, and yet and still, people of color have been manipulated and emancipated to such a degree that with great freedom came great conflict. And let us get to the big elephant in the room. Crack didn't just kill Applejack. Crack killed a lot of people's ability to actually even consider the mere fact that a consumption, a mass consumption of a drug changed everyone's morality to where we are right now. And while we would want to believe that we should be this way or that way or this way or that way, where we're at right now is at a place that we shouldn't be here. Most of us are growing to an age that has never been a norm. Most people were supposed to be gone and grandkids and the whole nine by 50, 55, 60, 65. And we've got presidents that are in their 70s. We've got too many adults taking up too much space that should be for the other adults as they come in. And they're holding on to it because they got nothing else to go to. There's no retiring in a place that you can't trust that someone will allow you to keep all the trinkets that you stole from, respectful people. And then there's the battle of the sexes. And no matter how people feel about it being, oh yeah, and it's this and it's that and this, that, and the other. The problem here is that people of color never had the kind of problems that everyone else that decided that we needed these freedoms, required those to be that. And yet and still, sometimes when you give some people who need to be under the guidance of someone else more freedom than the people that can provide that guidance, then it becomes very difficult for them to even fathom the thought that there's a need for them. I don't need them anymore. And yet and still, who raises us? We've gone to a point where our existence is never expressed in a manner of, I live for my village. I'm not just about me. I know what it is, and this and that. People that are taking unions and taking on other people's namesakes and family sakes that are more personally, selfishly driven by the need to basically be like, and not realizing that every namesake that you possessed at any point in another deserves a reason for there being some connection to you or someone like you that they can look to and say, see, I'm not just insignificant in life. There are too many people that are trying to force other people to believe that they're as average as they believe. Oh, yes, you know, poor old average Americans. There is no average Americans. For a lot of people that aren't people of color, understand something. People of color don't understand people of color. And yet, and still, for people of non-color, it becomes twice as difficult because, you know what, I don't really want to believe that, but yeah, it's just as serious as back in the day. If you were in a bar and you're about to drink somebody or have a drinking contest, you'd want to know if this guy was Irish or Scottish. "2020, if we don't sit back and take a real coming to Jesus moment, you don't got to really be that serious about who Jesus is or not, but understand that we're all our own personal Jesus, like the Patchmos. But not a whole lot of people could dance together because got this COVID shit. And it shut down too much and made us think about too much and made us have to suffer and deal with things that we really didn't want to have to be concerned about. And therein lies the problem as to where we are right now. We're supposed to have been at Star Trek by now. And yet, you know, if Art Kelly starred as James T. Kirk of the U.S. Enterprise, would it be just as entertaining? I am Alpha Master Pimp, Sir Easy, Active Dominant, Hafiz, a few other things. And I figure if nothing else, if someone gets any form of entertainment or enlightenment from wherever I've been right now, would you please help a brother out? Because this COVID stuff got me locked up. I ain't worked since March. And so it would be a lot more of a blessing if someone could cash app me. You see the name down there. Just throw me something. Nothing says thank you like cash. And I digress. This conflict, this Black American conflict, is the miseducation of the Negro. And until we know exactly how deep that goes, what do? Man, I need to work on this volume. So, with all that being said, I'm going to wish all of you luck, because we're all going to need it if we're going to make it through this change, this evolution. You know, the value of change is measured in the discomfort you have to experience in order to get there. Beat that. You good?